all the way from London. So must be evening right there, Anirudh. Late afternoon.
Yeah, 3:30 p.m.
Yeah. So all of you, thank you so much. All of you. I am assuming most of you guys are joining from India, and so it's pretty late by that standard. But we had to accommodate for Anirudh because he's joining from London, as I said. And all of you, welcome this third session on master classes, where we are calling a lot of different industry veterans and mentors of the ACE program to come in and speak to the cohort people and people who are interested in entrepreneurship, people who are interested in building new products. And we talk about different aspects of product management. We talk about different aspects of entrepreneurship. And today is special because we have Anirudh Maitra joining in. As I said, all the way from London. He works as a product manager for one of the apps, which I would be very surprised if anyone out of this group does not use, which is WhatsApp. It is very rare for people to be working on products which almost everybody uses. And I think to his credit, for Anirudh, he is not just, of course, he's working on WhatsApp, which is the Meta product. But if you can see the top 3 consumer tech companies, which is Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, he sort of worked in all 3 companies. And of course, we started, at least I started my product management career from Make My Trip, which is where Anirudh and I met. We worked together. It's been 10 years? Yeah, 2012, right? 11, 12. I can take this much of credit that I was the one who also interviewed Anirudh. So I was the one in the interviewing panel when I interviewed Anirudh, and when I was asked to rate, I said he's better than me, so just hire him and don't ask anything. And of course, then we worked in different organizations and mostly worked on the product/business cusp, which is more commercial roles and product, whereas Anirudh has worked more on the technology/product side, if I can say that like that. And now with this at ACE, of course, the intent is to be helping a lot of different entrepreneurs, a lot of different startup founders who are thinking about ideating, who are thinking about solving bigger and real problems for the users. And this is where I thought it would be a good idea to actually take Anirudh on board and speak about how is, in his experience across these iconic companies, brands, right, wherever he has worked, what are some of the frameworks when a company like Google or Facebook or Microsoft or Make My Trip, when they look at a particular problem, how do we evaluate these problems? How do we know whether this problem is the right problem to be solved? How do you assess market? How do you do customer feedback, take customer feedback, and eventually, how do you do the MVP and roll out the products, right? So that's the entire gamut. And what we have tried to do today, what we will try to do today, is not just give a very theoretical framework, but also take few practical examples. And I have 3 examples in my list, which we will talk about and try and break it down into stepwise process that, how does he think about breaking this down as problem statements? And, we will feel free, and you guys are feel free to add in any questions and I will see if we can take it during the course of the discussion or towards the end. So with that background, I would want Anirudh to also introduce himself and talk something about his journey so far as a product person, and how does it look at problem solving.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sharendra, for that kind introduction. Really fond memories of us going all the way back, I think 10 years now, almost exactly. Started our journey 2012 in Make My Trip on the product management side. So very quickly, like I'm currently a product manager at WhatsApp. It's one of the products that everybody uses every day. But interestingly, on WhatsApp, I work on business messaging, which is actually an early stage product from WhatsApp's consumer PMF standpoint. So it's an interesting paradigm. How do you establish product market fit in an area where the product already has great consumer traction? I'll talk a bit about like some of the frameworks we use here later in our chat. Prior to this, I was a PM at Google, where I worked on two different products. One was Google Assistant, where the journey was more, on the consumer side, but it was again pre-product market fit, essentially building voice products on the phone, for emerging market users in India, Indonesia, and Brazil. And the second one was on Google Pay, where it was more 1 to 100. The app was already doing really well, and the charter was more to grow the app in India. Previously, like I've worked at companies like Microsoft on products like Bing Sports, at Hype Messenger, another messaging app in India, and also Make My Trip, where I really learned a lot of my product management chops. So it was very interesting to work there, on mobile products when it was basically a web company, and by the time I think it became a mobile company, so it was a very interesting journey and a transition. So when you asked about becoming a mentor at Change Engine and like setting up this chat, like it felt that most of my PM journey has been building 0 to 1 products. So it'll be good to distill it down, share it with this audience of young entrepreneurs like looking to start maybe at the idea stage. So what we'll try to do today is that not focus the chat on hardcore product managers where we can get into the gory details of defining the right metric, but like keep it at a level above where we come back with more of a practical daily use framework for entrepreneurs looking to get stuff done, figure out what will work, what will not work, and make it super practical. So that is what we'll focus on. Of course, if there are like double click questions that anybody has, feel free to post them in the chat. We can answer them either in line or at the end. So really looking forward to it. Thank you, Shailendra.
Yeah, thanks, Anirudh. So, just product management 101, I just wanted to understand the audience here. So, how many of you guys, you can just show of hand, raise your hand and using the reaction and tell me, are founders or looking at starting something on your own? How many of you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty decent. Almost half the class, like half the, not half, actually 30% of like, and others I'm assuming are more interested in the product management. Right? Okay. So we know that, this is the composition, like almost 30-40% people are looking at an entrepreneurship thing as a competition, and others are also, a lot of people like know from their names that they are PMs and wanting to hear from Anirudh, his framework and his approach to taking products from idea to PMF. So that helps. Thank you, guys. So what I will do is, to start off, Anirudh, what has been happening in the last 2-3 months, 4 months, in which we have been speaking to a lot of startup guys and people who are thinking of starting and doing something on their own. By the way, can you guys mute yourself? I think there's some noise coming from somewhere. Or Akshat, can you mute everyone?
Yes, sir. Just a minute.
So there might be people who might be accidentally on unmute.
Just a minute, I'm doing.
Okay, so while he does that, so what happens is when we are talking to a lot of these entrepreneurs and young people who are trying to start something on their own, and we've been talking intentionally to a lot of college students, and largely engineering college students, and also non-engineering students. Some of the time, a lot of times, what happens is whatever problem. So what happens is some of the times, what the problems which we face, that happens to become, that happens to take the top of our mind priority, right? And we think we are facing this problem, then this problem is worth solving. This is not the bad way to start, honestly. But a lot of times we get so clouded and colored by our own experiences that we start forgetting about whether, how do we even test this out, that this problem exists at the first place or not. So I'll just share an example of this, and then we can take it forward. That some of the students, especially engineering students, are trying to create a note sharing platform, right? Because a lot of these, and you are yourself an engineer, you would know, a lot of people would not create their own notes. They would just rely on sharing notes. There are toppers and some people who will create notes, and these notes get circulated across. This is how typically engineering colleges, and not just engineering. Because I again come from the engineering background, can vouch for the engineers, but definitely there are other streams also. I'm sure the same phenomena is kind of gets replicated. So if somebody asks you that if there's a person who comes in and say that I want to create a note sharing application where people can share their notes, in whichever way, we're not going to a solution, but just a problem. So how do you approach this kind of a startup idea?
Cool. So before I kind of like jump into the specific idea and maybe kind of like think through what might be the starting steps there, I think just a quick note on your earlier comment on how a lot of ideas like start with a personal pain point, and why that may or may not be a good starting point. I think a lot of great companies got started where founders had like a personal pain point. The Uber story, Airbnb story, are great examples of like really large companies that started with some personal pain points. Founders were very attentive to that pain point, but they followed a methodical process after that, to figure out if this was something worth building a company around. So I think like that could be a great impulse to start off, but that alone might not be enough, for you to build a successful product and a successful company and business around it. So that caveat out of the way, like maybe we can go a little bit into the specific idea. So the way I understand what you're describing is that imagine like there is this product where you as a student in a college can essentially on one side like get access to all the notes across the different courses that you are enrolled in as a consumer of the product, and on the other side I'm assuming there's people who take notes, which is going to be probably the minority of the class. I was one of them during my engineering days when things were more analog and less digital. But I'm assuming there's the other side which contributes notes, and then this app essentially helps match these two sides, and there's value getting exchange because lots of people want access to these good quality notes to revise for their exams, prepare, do well in their studies. And on the other side, I'm assuming there could be some angle of monetization, some angle of community and social cred associated with it, etc. So on the face of it, I think the idea has legs. Like it makes sense. There is base value for either side. There's a real problem worth solving. But before we go a little bit into what might be the steps, I think what I'd want to say is that at a high level, I just have like a 5-point framework to take an idea and graduate it towards product market fit. Not all steps might be relevant for each idea. Some ideas you can just kill at the early stages, but like the very first step would be like, who are my target users? The second step might be, what might be, their pain points, and how might my product, provide value to them, which I call as like value proposition. The third step might be that once you know the target users, once you know the value propositions, like what is the bare minimum product you would build so that you can provide this value to these users, and then you test with these users, which would be the fourth step. You iterate the product based on their feedback. And the fifth step would be you figure out what are the right metrics, for you to know whether you have product market fit, or do you need to again build the product and rinse and repeat these steps, right? So starting with the very first step, I think let's start a little bit broader. I think this is a very common problem for students. Like undergrad students will have this problem, graduate students will have this problem, PhD students will have this problem. So there's a broad landscape of educational hierarchy to consider. Focusing across the board might be very hard because this is a very broad spectrum of users. So you may want to pick something to start with. Maybe you want to go a little bit more undergrad first, where the need might be more acute. There's a lot of prep that happens just a day before the exam, and the value of the notes, etc., and really good quality notes is like much higher during that period. So the value of the product is higher. So maybe that's like one starting thought to consider to define the segment. Second might be like, what educational segment are you focusing on? Is it engineering education? Is it medical? Is it something like commerce? Is it like other fields of education? Like again, or business education? Like which field would extract value? Maybe there's value across the board, but you may want to start with a field where you know the audience better, where you have existing connections, where you can talk to them, learn more about their needs. So let's assume that this is undergrad education, more engineering focused, where where the need is very acute. You have like access to those users, you can talk to them. I think what I do next is like figure out some sample potential early adopter students as a way to do like primary research. Like this is still you trying to figure out who these users are, what are their daily habits, what are their daily pain points, what are they doing today to solve this problem. Of course, a lot of this is happening maybe through WhatsApp, maybe through the college's internal groups, maybe a Facebook group that also facilitates this. So there may be existing patterns that you need to observe, and then you need to see like what might be the inefficiencies there, and what might be the pain points which are not being able to get solved through that. So I do a bunch of primary research, like talking to maybe like 20, 30 users. You'll start to see patterns on either side, maybe the ones who are producing the notes, maybe the ones you're consuming, and what sort of dynamics and pain points exist. If there are competitive products in the market, I think I'd go and tear them down as well, and see like talk to the users of those products and figure out like what marquee features in their product like really work and resonates, just to extract out the core value. So I'd spend a bunch of time before building the product on these two steps, right? Like just defining the user base, just defining my primary research, learning about the core needs of the users, and then like figuring out what are the real pain points, what is the competition doing, what might I learn from them. Once I've done like these two things, I try to then synthesize like what my product could stand for. Like it should be, if there's existing competition, it should be slightly differentiated from those alternatives. If there's nothing, then you may look at like alternative ways of doing stuff and how it might actually save time, increase efficiency, add some value to the users on either side. And I try to basically define the MVP, but we can get into that. But I'll start with these two steps first, and we can and then go further from that and not directly build the product.
All right. So, I've just made some quick notes. First of all, I think that's a great framework to sort of put things in perspective, that, these are the 5 steps, starting with understanding your users, or TG as we say, and then identifying what is the core value, what are the value proposition which you can offer or sort of negate the pain point which is there. Third is the MVP part, which is the minimum viable product, for others who don't understand the full form of MVP, which is what is the minimum product which you also, without even writing a single piece of code, and create a product to just, we have known in Maitra, we used to hear stories that, the initial few years, they just used to operate on Excel for many of the inventory management and stuff like this. Of course, there are like sophisticated tools and everything now. But, a lot of times we feel that, we need to create a product, whereas some of the existing tools might itself do the job. It will just tell you whether, there is meat in this thing or not. And the fourth thing you said was testing and iteration. How do you test and iterate? And fifth, which I thought was very important, which a lot of people miss, is how do you measure the impact? Like what are the metrics which you choose? So And one interesting which I noticed was that you can start from your own natural vantage point, because if you're an engineer, you would feel that this is the most to understand that user segment also. But don't limit yourself to that. Maybe you identify there is a bigger use case out there, maybe commerce students or medical students or something else. There, the use case actually is much bigger, and that bigger can be both in terms of quantitative, as in there are a lot of people there, or maybe qualitative, like there is more value for maybe UPSC aspirant, for example, right? Note sharing might be a very big use case there also, etc. So you don't have to limit to that. And second, I think, which I've noted down, was picking up one thing. A lot of times what people get into this thing is that they want to cover everything. And they think if we provide too much of value, that is the right thing. Whereas ideally, you should be picking only one or few which you can execute really well, and then sort of move on. So yeah. But I have a follow-up question, Anirudh, which is, in segments or TG or user type. So one is secondary research, you figure out Google and stuff like that. What are the other ways in which you can also find out what are the other user types?
Yeah, so I think that's a very important question. Like many a times, what ends up happening is that we may be building for users that we cannot empathize with naturally. So we have to build like other mechanisms to understand space, their needs better. And I'll kind of like layer a work story here. So at Google, like one of the projects that I was on was to build a Google Assistant on a 1,500 rupee like geophone. The target user, for this like was essentially a tier 2, tier 3, even a rural Indian user, right? And but the interesting thing about the device was that it had a 4G LTE connection. Given Jio had baked it into the device, and it was like quite fast, like from a data point of view. But the device was a hardware which was not the smartphones that we are used to. The user was a non-English user. They didn't understand concepts like login, sign up a Google account. All they knew was like they could speak to a phone, get answers, play some music and stuff like that, right? So I think the interesting thing we did before we got into like defining the product, building the product, was that we did a lot of primary user interviews. So the idea there was that we figured out that there's no point focusing on the traditional ways of doing research, where we used to call participants to our offices, talk to them for an hour. So we thought that let's just actually do real field trips. So a bunch of PMs, designers on the team, even researchers, Google had access to some of these. Actually visited 15 to 20 cities, small cities in India, tier 2, tier 3 India, across languages, like things like Marathi, Malayalam, Telugu, where voice quality would be very different on our technology, and their needs might be different, etc. So we went down, we spoke to I think close to 100 users, and try to understand like do they know about Google? What are their daily kind of like information needs, media needs, entertainment needs? Like it was so abstracted, from the product that we were trying to build. We were just trying to understand their day in the life. What were their common, kind of like needs for information, media, communication, etc. And we really had to then structure it back into a set of like common principles for where the value might lie for a user persona like this. So what came out of that was that we were able to define this user persona. So we had like attributes like, okay, this is essentially a user who would belong to an India 2 socioeconomic ladder. They would be primarily non-English users. These would be users who would be for the first time using the internet on a device. These would be users who would be very careful about, if it's a female user, would be very careful about, that this might not be their own personal device. It might be a shared device. They may be using their husband's phone. So they were very conscious about like logging and, you know, what you know, their son or their husband might find out they were searching for. We figured out that a lot of the needs were very simple. It was just like focused on media, like playing that YouTube video, playing that song, or like finding, you know, basic information on Google, but like having it like talked back to them instead of like the traditional Google search results page experience that we want. And what we also figured out is like these users would have no idea about Google as a product. They didn't know even search, right? So there's no concept of a Google account, a login, etc. Like all of these were like alien concepts. What I'd recommend is like in these situations, first like start with this acknowledgement that you know nothing about the user. Many a time like that acknowledgement itself is very humbling and important to start off the journey with. And then I think like really figure out how can you spend a good amount of quality time in the environment that these users are in, so that like you can talk to them, you can figure out their day in the life, you can figure out the context in which your product is likely to get used, and then synthesize it back to top 3-4 things that you may want to solve for them once you have that empathy built out. I would do it no other way. Like you can do secondary research, you can watch YouTube videos of research, you can you can look at competitive products. It's very hard to empathize with the real user needs, especially if you are building for users who are like just not like you, and there's no shortcut here.
I can't agree more. I think there's any term which I use most is empathy for product management, right? And people don't just get it that, what does it actually mean when we say empathy? You have to literally spend time, get into the shoes of those people, because most of the time you will be ending up creating a product which you yourself are not a primary user of, especially in product management, right? And even otherwise, even as an entrepreneur, you may be creating something to start with a specific need, but then the business might grow into multiple users, and you may not be able to always relate to that user. But there is no substitute to spending time. I remember at Spinny when I was working previously, and they were like we had this merchant platform products, right, which the car sellers used to use, and they used to always create that this doesn't work, and it was always working in our offices. Of course, products always work in boardrooms and in your offices, in your setup, it will always work. And when we made a visit and, we realized that all of these hubs were largely in the basements of hotels or malls, right, where the internet becomes an issue. And, they were not even able to even articulate this, that, that is the problem, which is as simple as that. And, when the first thing I noticed, there is no internet, like there is internet, but, it takes time. So the loading time will increase and, stuff like this. And then we started off this thing on an online version of the app, because, you could just, show it, and spending literally hours into doing that. So, yeah. But I think we can move on to the next example also, and feel free, guys, to put any comment or any question if you have, so that I can take it up accordingly. But moving on from the note sharing example, another example which I really found very, very fascinating, and then I started observing it also, was a pet walker service. So you have your dogs and your cats, and mostly dogs, I think they require more walking than cats. Cats are little asocial animal in that sense. They are fine in their own apartments. But so like a Uber for pet walking. So all of these, especially in tier 1, tier 2 cities, you have people who will keep their pets, but for whatever reason, they don't have time or people who can take them out for a walk. And pet industry, by the way, I was just reading, and I realized it's a phenomenally fast growing industry. A lot of these startups which have started to come up in India, which are only focusing on pets. Pet wellness, their food, and all of this. So if somebody tells you that there's an idea that I want to create a Uber kind of a service for pet walkers, you can just open your app and ask people to come. They will just come and take your dog for a walk or something. So how do you this is a very different kind of idea than the previous one. So if you can also talk for some time too. How do you think about this problem?
Yeah, so I think like this is a very interesting idea. I think it shares like some of the characteristics from the previous one. So I think like in my head, this is essentially a product that connects two sides again. On the one side, you have the user of the app who has a pet. They are likely fairly busy in their lives. They don't have time to walk their pets. So they are the user, and on the other side, like you have supply of maybe part-time workers, like who can contribute a few hours, earn some money, and like walk their pets, but are like generally good with pets and animals, right? So essentially, this is again a matching service that is able to match this supply and demand, but is like laser focused on this segment of users. So again, like I'd kind of like apply the same framework again. Like you start with like who are your users. This is not so controversial. I think it makes sense that this is going to be a more urban idea. Users are likely to be more time poor, money rich. The segment that comes to mind is like double income, no kids, then couples, like working tough jobs, corporate jobs. Our pet parents likely want help and support like with their pets. So that's sort of an audience like on the user side. On the supply side, it feels again like you'd want to target potential supply which has like a few hours of spare time every day, want to earn additional income, and you would want to kind of like get them onto the platform. Many of these again like would be very easy to source, like in urban areas where the cost of living is high for a vast majority of the socioeconomic strata. So again, like the TG seems fairly clear, from this side. It feels like a stretch that you would go to tier 2, tier 3 to start this idea. The value proposition is also fairly clear to me here. Like I think on the user side, you're helping them save time. You're giving a better quality of daily life to their pets. There's clear value here. They would be ready to pay for this. And on the other side, like you're helping them earn an additional income. So there's like clear value. So I think like these two pieces feel fairly clear in the idea. I think what I do next is like really think through like what the MVP might be that could be the easiest way to test like how good the matching is, because I suspect the matching is the critical part of this idea. Like you need fairly hyper local supply and demand, you need competitive pricing, and so you to test this matching, you need to test the pricing and the quickness and availability of the supply. So I'd focus on like what is the cheapest way to build the MVP, get feedback from early adopters, and then like iterate before really building a full scale product, that can move towards like core testing, iteration, and then PMF. So one idea that comes to mind immediately is that you can fairly easily build this product on an app like WhatsApp. WhatsApp
I hope you're
has,
not saying this because you are working for WhatsApp, right?
no, it just like it just
Yeah, of
it just
course. Yeah, no, I'm
is
joking.
the fastest way to test. Like this is an app everybody has, like both supply demand
Right.
have the app. It also seems to me that it is easier to kind of like get traction on either side. Like if you live in a society, you see a lot of pet parents around, like it's easy for you to message them and get them to tell you if they have the need, like schedule stuff, etc. And like you can manually record, keep it at small scale to test
Right.
the sooner. On the other side, like you can easily aggregate supply, and get them. Again, you can manage all of that on WhatsApp instead of building a supply app or anything complicated like that. So I'd start with something like that can be maybe like very manual ops, like with the support of one or two people, maybe interns, etc. And then like just like focus on a few the society you live in, maybe some places nearby where you can really do this, and like maybe start with like the first 20, 30 kind of like users, and see like what are the areas will be the hardest to crack here. Like intuitively, what comes to mind is that there might be a few classes of users who may want to use the service. So one who may require like daily but very timed walk schedules, right? Like because it needs to align with their office work, like other commitments. They may be more infrequent users as well, who may just need it on the weekends. On the weekdays, they're able to make time. Weekends, they want to keep free, and like they want to basically use it for other things. There may be other use cases, which might be just like infrequent, ad hoc. Maybe they already have house help, etc., who does this, but they go back home and they need it like for a month, or like just like ad hoc, like when they're not available. So one, like figuring out like these sub segments of users, while the broader segment is clear, like where the need might be more acute, where fit might be better, where there might be some pricing advantages and like some business model advantages. Like one would be like just figuring that out. And the way I do that is like I just like talk to them. Like you don't even need to build it into the service. Like and just like ask them, what might be the cases in which you might use the service. How much would you be willing to pay? And then like test with them like a few of those. On the other side, I'd imagine intuitively again, like just like ensuring the supply is like reliable is going to be a challenge. Like when you want somebody to show up to walk your dog at 4 p.m., if they are not there by 4:30, or if there's like excessive follow-up needed, like that, the quality of that service is like super bad.
Right.
So I think like you'd have to figure out like how do you get like reliable supply that is like high quality, like great experience, no complaints, great customer satisfaction. How do you build that at a hyper local level so that like people reach on their door at time, they give a great service, and then you're able to close the loop. So I'd basically start with something where you're actually not building the product, because the idea is such, it's more about the service and the match and the quality. And I'd focus there first, as opposed to, figuring out the technology on either side, building this very complicated algorithm to match supply and demand, do like this complicated pricing. All of that can happen like much later. Like my focus on this idea would be like figure out the cheapest way to build the MVP, figure out the cheapest way to get the most critical questions answered, so that like you understand the city well, and then you do the build out, and then like test and iterate at a higher scale.
So, interesting. There are two things which I noticed, which I copied, and I wanted to ask was, one is around, you mentioned about the two-sided network. So a lot of times when you will invariably have two-sided networks, right? As in the first example also, there was a creator and then there was a user. Is it always, what is your recommendation on which segment to approach first, and what is the mental model to, should we approach the helper first? Should we approach the users first? And does that align with the sort of vision of the product or the organization more, because you're more focusing on this or that, or is there any other way to think about it?
Yeah, so like typically in like two-sided networks, like what I've realized is that you have to short circuit one side first.
Yeah.
So let's take the example of like Airbnb. So you need like supply of like great accommodation, and then on the other side you need enough demand of like bookers, so that you can generate like income like for the people who are renting these places out. I think in most cases what ends up happening is that you have to short circuit the supply or the inventory of that service first, even if it comes at the cost of giving away some incentives, like making it really lucrative for that side to list. So for example, in this like pet walker service idea, it might be about like getting like 10 people who you are paying, I don't know, 10,000 per month, even if they get like no jobs, right? So that that these people are always available at any point in the day and are ready to service that demand locally, so that like you can really focus on generating the user demand and then like giving them a very high quality service and learn about that side of the dynamics first. It will generally be a bad idea where you're trying to organically bootstrap demand and supply both at the same time.
Yeah.
That is hard. I've generally never seen that work unless it's a purely technical idea on either side and there's no real world ops involved. So I generally think that you'd need to think like which side to short circuit first, which side is easier to short circuit first, and then like focus on building the other side first. And then once you know the other side, then you can relax some of the constraints on the side that you short circuited, and then learn about that and get to more fairer setup.
Understood. Yeah, and I had another question on, you mentioned about the feedback and on the testing and iteration. You talk to users and take some feedback, etc. There are a lot of times when, especially in a B2C product, there will be very tons of feedback coming in, right? You have everybody giving something to you as a product manager, as a business person. What is your model and framework to distill, as we say, the signal versus the noise, right? What is the meaningful feedback which has to be worked upon versus what is something which, because people will generally give you tons of feedback. So a lot of entrepreneurs also have this problem. They start working on every feedback which is coming, and maybe not every feedback is worth getting actioned on, right? So any comments on that?
Yeah, this is a hard one to kind of like generically answer, because I think a lot depends on the context of the product that you're trying to build, the specific context of that feedback, and the team, and like their motivations and what you're thinking at that point in time. But I think in general, like what I'd like to say is that, like, if you are in very early stages of the product, I think it would be very tough, for you to succeed if you don't conserve the most important resource of your company, which is your development time and your focus, right? So I think like that is the kernel. Let's say if you're building this like pet walker service, and you've done step 1 and 2, you've identified the TG, you've figured out the value prop, and you realize that cracking user demand in the next 6 months is the biggest P0 goal for the team. Then I think ideas that come on the supply side, like, you should deprioritize. You will get a lot of feedback there, maybe. Like, you would not solve it, you would let some of those fires burn knowingly, because like that's not worth solving right now. These 6 months are like for figuring out the user demand side. There, like, you may need to go like a couple of levels deeper. You may realize that the specific target audience on the user side that I really want to focus on is to build a recurring pet walking service. Like, you don't want to cater to weekend demand, you don't want to cater to this ad hoc users, etc. Like, that's not the TG. This is about like daily walking, and I want to just like focus there. So the feedback that's coming there, where, hey, on most days, like, I want this like recurring service, but I want pausing because I'm going on vacation with my pet, or I want an easy way, for me to change the end date, start date of this like recurring subscription. Like, those kind of feedbacks, like, I'd prioritize, because it intuitively makes sense to the goal that you're looking to chase, and the specific focus on the side that you have. So I basically try to create a mental model of like, what is the most important problem to solve in that time frame? What are the feedback pointers that help you make progress there? What are the things that will take you away from that? And like, overall, like, minimize the things that will take you away from that and focus more on the things that will take you towards it. Again, you may not get all of these right, which is fine, and startups are hard.
No, that makes a lot of sense. There is a question also which is there, and which says that, if we are able to create I think Bhargav is asking, if we are able to create a PMF for an initial launch and we manage to generate traction, but it turns out that the app that is good for the new user, but there is no retention after a few months. So how do we pivot from that? Again, this is a slightly generic question, but if you can take this.
Yeah, so I think this is a little bit on steps 4 and 5 of the framework that we started with, which is that and more around the 5th part, like, which is like how to define product market fit. How do you know which metrics are important? So I think the question hits upon a very important thing. Like, sometimes certain ideas have good takeoff, so you need to users get on, they're able to get some basic value, but then the value is not like sticky enough for them to repeatedly use the service, assuming the app is such that you're supposed to use it repeatedly, unlike, let's say, Spinny, where you do that once in like
Yeah.
many years, right?
Yeah.
So if that is the case, then I'd basically try to see like why that is happening. So I'm assuming like any product will have all classes of users above a certain scale. You'd have users who are also repeating, even though the overall retention is like very low. So I try to talk to them and figure out like why are they continuing to use the service, and of users who are basically churning out. I would also talk to them and figure out like what is it that got them excited about the platform and why did they churn out. Was it that they expected the value to be more? Was it that the pricing was too high? Was it like they had like better alternatives that they figured out and they migrated? So I think it's very important to debug both sides, which is that of the people who retain, why do they retain? Of the people who churn, why do they churn? And then try to see, could you build new things before you take the decision of the pivot? Like, are there like some easy things that you could do to address this, which would lead to repeat behavior? If that is the case, then I'd invest and stick around and try to basically see if you get retention. If you're able to, if you come back and say that, I think it just goes back to us like getting the core value proposition wrong. Like we never got it right in the first place. This is just incidental that we were able to create like some good takeoff initially. Then I'd say that it may require a strong pivot, where you may need to repeat the whole, maybe you shift the TG a bit, maybe you change the approach to the problem and solution a bit, and then like you rebuild the product based on some baseline. But again, like these are considered choices. Like if there are examples and like more context here, I'm happy to take another considered as well.
So what we can do is we can open it up for questions, because I had a third example also, but I think we've pretty well, and I would actually allow people to ask any specific questions on the discussion which we have had so far, or anything new. So just unmute and speak, or you can type your answers there also, or you can just raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute and speak.
Hi Shailendra, hi Anirudh. Am I
Hi,
audible?
Kashish. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to ask, should we try to build a product which has a big market but already has a lot of competition, or should we try to build a product which has some of unique features and doesn't have that big a market but is unique? So what will you prefer?
Anirudh?
Means just to give an example, such as Flipkart was made, but at that time Amazon existed. So should we try something like that, which has a big market, or should we try something unique? There is a no-code platform which is something unique right now.
Yeah, so I think like I think that's a classic dilemma, which like a lot of startup founders have like, which is that do you go after now, but like you have a unique insight, there's a unique problem to be solved, and you may be the first in the market. And then on the flip side, like you may have a big market, lots of competition. You may have a differentiation angle, but you're not sure like how strong that is like against all that competition. So I think on the balance, like I think again, like it will really depend on what are we trading off, and like in most cases, like you will not have both of these choices. You will have a specific idea and a specific market condition to evaluate. Like in general, like my thesis will be that optimize for a good market first. So what that means is that if you feel that the market today is small, but it is like growing, like for example, in your example which you gave, like it could be a no-code tool. It may be initially focused on like marketers, who are looking. You feel like this is a growing market, like a lot of classes of knowledge workers could use this tool, for example. then I think like that's a good market, right? Like that's a good market because it has a critical characteristic of like, growth, and then like if you are able to find in like that segment, you can, one, that market will grow, you can grow adjacent in some adjacent categories as well. So one, like think through that. The second thing I'd say is that it might be better to find fit in a market that you can intuitively define and differentiate, right? So for example, even if the market is small, but your insight is like very clear and the value that your product provides is like very concrete, then it might be like it might be easier for you to build that product, figure out if it is working or not, as opposed to going in a very big market where the differentiation might not be that high, because you may not realize like why your product is not working. It might be the case that there might be already a lot of existing network effects from existing products out there, which just have a lot of switching costs in the minds of the user. So the users who are even willing to consider your product are just not in the space of mind to test something new. They don't want to go towards, even giving you the time and space. So it might be very hard to read the signal. It's not impossible, but like it might not be easy. So if the market conditions are good, your insight is good, you can get to that market and like test your product with that insight. It's not a bad choice to have, as long as you're able to scale that product with that market's growth and like figure out like other adjacent segments to go after. Of course, like if the market is like very, very small, and it is going to be small or shrinking in the future, but your insight is like unique, like you may just build a very small business and that may not work out like for your product and what you are looking for, then you should abandon. Then maybe the other side might be better. But it's very rare that you might have ideas on both sides, like which are well fleshed out, and you are actually evaluating them at the same time.
Yeah. Any other question? There is one actually. Is Net Promoter Score a good way of evaluating PMF for fintech?
So I think I'd basically kind of like generalize a bit here, like instead of like just commenting on Net Promoter Score, I think Shailendra, you can also chime in here, given like experience. Like I think like some format of CSAT scores, or or like user experience quality scores in general are a good metric to keep in your portfolio of PMF metrics. Like you may have like more hardcore metrics, like things like growth rate, activation rate, retention, if there are like costs involved and costs and stuff like that. So
No, go ahead.
yeah, so you may have like all of those like key product metrics like across your full growth funnel, but I think it is super important to keep a balancing metric, which could either be a customer satisfaction score or an NPS score or any other qualitative user quality metric, but I would not think of that as the only metric, because like that may not give you the complete picture. NPS has worked for a lot of companies. It has also not worked for a lot of companies. So it's one of those metrics where it depends on your implementation of that and your interpretation of that metric. So the jury is divided. But I think like as long as like you have a balanced portfolio of things to look at, like I think it would be a strong metric to consider. But I'd just not only consider that metric to figure out whether you.
No, I completely agree. I think it has to be a balance of both your sort of revenue/growth metrics as well as a customer retention. This is more of a customer experience metric, where how are people reacting to your product? Are they finding it useful? Technically the definition says that, how likely are you to recommend this to your friend and family? That means that's a very strong indicator of you have not just liked it, but you've liked it so much that you're able to refer it to somebody else. And for fintech kind of products, I'm assuming because this is more recurring kind of use, like you are using it every week, probably, if not every day. So that's definitely a strong metric. But yeah, I agree with Anirudh. It cannot be the only metric to sort of test the PMF on. Sonali is asking about social enterprise. So Sonali, I don't really understand. So you want to understand more about social enterprise in what sense? Like you just generally want to know what is a social enterprise, or is it thing around which you are trying to refer here? Generally, okay. See, it's a very wide topic, but I can just take a minute to explain. And honestly, I am also mostly worked in for-profit organizations. Generally, social enterprises are non-for-profit organizations, which see, as we used to read in the MBA classes, right? The sole purpose of an organization for a for-profit organization is to create shareholder value. And largely it means revenue and profit, and mostly monetary in sense. Whereas a for non-for-profit organization typically has a social angle. They largely have a motive in their mind, which is not just monetary, which means that doesn't mean they don't make money, right? They do make money, but that money is then pooled in back, not to create shareholders equity or money, but rather going back to the same purpose. It can be things around, say, climate change. It can be things around job creation. It can be things around poverty elimination, or things like those. And many of these are non-for-profit organizations. India, unfortunately, does not have very good examples of very successful non-for-profit organizations. Whereas if you go to the US, you will have like billion-dollar companies which are non-for-profit. I was surprised to that Rolex brand, right? This expensive watch is actually a non-for-profit organization. Intuitively it doesn't make sense, but that's actually so. I think that is what I can answer, and I think you can then read more around it. Yeah, there are other questions also. We have a few minutes, so we'll just take those. Bhargav is saying, how do we do the first-hand market research in a more transparent way? Because when we talk to hundreds of users and then roll out the product, it turned out that only 20% of them were transparent and follow up that they would buy the product. So his question is that when you ask users, of course, they will say a different thing. And when you start selling this, they will say a different thing. There is actually a very brilliant book called The Mom's Test. I don't know if you have read it or not, but I would strongly recommend that you read that. It talks about how when you're approaching a prospective client or a prospective user, how do you ask these questions? Because asking the questions is also an art, and especially asking your prospective client. Like if you really ask that, will you buy this product? Everybody, most likely they will say that, yeah, we will buy. But there's a way, there's a certain method. How do you conduct these sessions and how do you ask these questions? So, that is what I can say, that, you have to be more clear and shrewd about how are you putting these questions, because generally it will happen even in terms of whenever we used to have all these usability sessions and other feedback sessions from users. A lot of time people will say a lot of things. You have to have that sense to figure out what is the most meaningful thing out of this, and then apply that. Yeah, Anirudh?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question to ask. Like, I think it's very important not to be carried away by just what you learn from primary research and the answers there. There's, of course, like you can ask that question really well. You can ask a lot of like counter questions to figure out if the user really meant what they said, etc. But I think in general, my framework is like whatever you learn from user research, I think it's directional. It gives you an indication on what may work, what may not work. But when you really build the product is when you can validate with your own data and figure out whether those insights are valid and how true or how not true those are. So always important to keep that in mind. But I think what I've really realized is that you can always get the gross negatives out really well. So if users are expressing that they won't do something like even in that research-like setup where you're asking them the question, very unlikely that they will start to do that in your product if you were to build that out. You have to be a little bit more careful when they're giving you, glowing positive feedback on something that you're proposing, because that you might have to validate in your product.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. There was a third problem which we want to discuss, but we are not discussing, and somebody's asking what is that problem? What is that idea? That idea was around how do you use AI to create a product around resume screening. So because Chat GPT is now the flavor of the of times, right? So we thought we'll at least discuss something on which is more technical and using AI. But I don't think we'll have the time to do that because we are already just past 9 o'clock. So I think we would have to call it a day. If there is any other question, I see. There's a question by Anand that says, if we enter a disorganized market and find that our business model has a clear value proposition, customer segments, and channels, and customer validation is promising, what factors should be considered faced with operational challenges? I'm not sure if I understood that question. Does that mean you have the real proposition, you have the right validation, but there are a lot of operational challenges in running that business? I think that is what you're trying to refer. Yeah. See, so I don't think that can be answered in 2-3 minutes, because every industry where you operate, right, and every business which you will work on will have very different set of operational challenges. Like in terms of the organizations I have worked, like a travel industry will have very different set of organizational challenges as in operational challenges, because they are real people who are being moved from one place to the other. Whereas if you talk about, say, a spinning kind of a product, that will have, again, very different kind of operational challenges, because then we're talking about cars and other things. And whereas, so I don't think it can be generalized to sort of answer that. It will have to be thought about from an industry specific lens.
Yeah, I'll just add like a quick point there. I think it like if you're able to figure out a fit, in like a clear market segment with like clear value proposition and channels like you're describing, I think you may just need to figure out like what amount of operational challenges are worth tolerating. There's like this very famous kind of like quote like from Y Combinator, right? Like lots of good ideas initially are done in a way that don't scale, but then over a period of time, like you solve one scale blocker after another, and you're able to make it like more operationally efficient. So I'd say like don't get phased away by the operational challenges. A lot of great businesses that you see today which are working at like enormous scale, like things like Maitra, Spinny, etc., have fairly complicated and challenging operations underneath that are able to render the service in the way it is working. And I think what you got to figure out is like what's an efficient way to do that, and what cost of running that operational challenge is like worth taking for the value that you're able to bring on the table. I would not write off the challenge. I would figure out the way to make it like efficient over a period of time, unless you get into a situation where it's just untenable to run it, and the value is just too small for being able to solve that challenge. I think just consider this more as a trade-off. I think we can answer more with specifics, but I think that's the general sentiment that's worth considering.
Agree. So I think it's already 5 minutes past the scheduled time, so we will have to close this now. I think there's an email ID which has been shared, which you can write your mails, you can write your queries on that, and we'll try to answer most of them. And as under the ACE program, in which we are trying to invite applications who we will take up as part of that Y Combinator which we are trying to establish in Delhi, in India. And we are sort of taking 6 to 8 entrepreneurs and take them through a 6-month course. Anirudh happens to be one of the mentors for that. So of course, all of you who qualify will get to share a lot of face time and time with Anirudh and take his experience. And there are a lot of other mentors. I've shared the link of that page. And if there is anybody who is interested and hasn't applied, the deadline is 7th, which is like this weekend. And we've already got more than 500 applications. So we are pretty overwhelmed by the response which we have received. And we are continuously working on each of those applications to make sure we find the right ones. match our criteria and the vision. So with that, I think thank you so much, Anirudh, for your time. And I think I learned a lot of things in this, and I'm sure a lot of people would have learned a lot. What we'll do is we'll share this this whole conversation on YouTube, maybe in a couple of days' time, and you guys can go and follow the Change Engine YouTube channel. We'll put it there and also share it on LinkedIn and other platforms. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anirudh, for your time once again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun and like really looking forward to what comes out of this group.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.